and welcome to Marriage Encounter. We're delighted to have you with us on the airways of Second Advent Radio. And for those of you looking on S02 Adventist, we're delighted. And on Facebook, we're delighted to have you with us. We trust that as we share today that you and your spouse, we invite you to call your spouse along. It's good to listen to Marriage Encounter together. And now, if you're not married, it's also a good thing to listen. There are some of you who are planning to get married and you have told me, I'm sure Pastor Braithwaite would say the same thing, that you're gaining valuable information here. And today's program, I want to suggest, is perhaps in all of the laws of boundaries that we're discussing, I want to think that today is really the law that you need to consider. Pastor Braithwaite, good day. Welcome to Marriage Encounter.
Good day, everybody. So happy to be here with you and to share. We continue to have some wonderful discussions on boundaries and the laws of boundaries. That way, we're coming to a close on the laws. We're at number 9 now. And, we will be shortly wrapping up on this particular area. But it has really been fruitful and meaningful. A lot of people, Doc, have called and indicated how very happy they are to listen and the information that they've gleaned. And so, we always encourage folks, just touch base with somebody, let them know that Marriage Encounter is on, listen on Second Advent or the YouTube channel. And what's really exciting about all of this is that you can also send the link to somebody at a later time, and they get to really benefit from the sessions.
Well, we invite you at this time to bow your heads as we have a word of prayer. Eternal Father and our God, be with us as we go into today's program. We ask for your wisdom and your guidance. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Dr. Braithwaite, I was suggesting in my greetings earlier that of all the laws we have discussed, and they're all very important, but I tend to think that today's law, the law of activity, is one that really pulls the whole discussion on boundary together. And I think for that reason, it's important for us. Last week, we kind of hinted a lot. In fact, we used the word assertive a lot last week. This week, we're going to be using the word passive. Mm-hmm. And maybe at the onset, we want to explain the difference between these two terminologies, just to put things in context. So when we're talking about individuals being, and I'm going to introduce a third term, which is aggressive, individuals being assertive or aggressive or passive, we're talking about 3 modes of expression that can either be outrageously bad, not good, and admirable. And being assertive, to be able to say what I want to say in a way that is clear, in a way that respects the other person, in a way that does not belittle the other individual, but at the same time brings my point across in a very forceful way, is what we really mean by being assertive. So I can express myself without fear, but not pushing down or embarrassing the other person, respecting them in the process.
Right,
That's
correct.
Being assertive. On the other hand, Doc, being passive.
Right. So passive often means taking a sort of a laid back approach to addressing maybe a particular issue. Passive persons sort of accept and follow what other people may say or what other people may do without an active response, without any form of resistance, sort of suggesting that you're not quite sure where you are or where you want to be. And that can be quite challenging and problematic, because if you are not, assertive, which is sort of the opposite, persons may think that they can just do whatever they want to do. And in the context of boundaries, it's really important to be able to say what you need, and rather than just follow along for the sake of following along.
Well, just for the records, we want to throw in the third term, which is aggressive. Now, we mentioned so far that the passive person is timid, withdrawn, almost suffering from self-esteem, so to speak. and a lack of thereof. And then the assertive person is the individual who is very expressive, who is articulate, who is able to say what they want, confident. The aggressive person, on the other hand, is the individual who has no respect for anybody. They just bulldoze themselves around. They push you out of their way with their words, of course. They make you know they're in charge, and they don't care about your feelings. If you don't like it, you pack up and you leave. That's the aggressive person. People oftentimes get turned off by these aggressive characters, and I have to say, Doc, I unfortunately I know a few persons like this, and let me just share this experience rather quickly. I met this individual once, very attractive young lady, seemed to be very good at what she did. But as I started interacting with her, I soon realized I can't work in an environment like this. No, I mean, she is just pushing everybody down. And you have to get to the point where you stand up and say to somebody like this, pull her aside and say, listen, I think I understand why you've had some challenges in the past. You need to step back and look at yourself. You have no respect for the other person. So we do have some persons like that every now and then. But right. Today's law is the law of activity. And we are going to be highlighting the dangers of this passive personality.
Right. So if we look at the law itself, it states, according to Cloud and Townsend, that the law of activity states that we need to take the initiative to solve our problems rather than being passive. We need to take the initiative to solve our problems rather than being passive.
So we're talking about a marriage relationship, Doc, and there are some individuals in a marriage, they wait for something to happen. Mm-hmm. They are never the ones to take action. They're never the ones to make it happen, to go out and take the initiative. They sit back and wait until their spouse does it for them. So we're saying here, activity says that you must stop sitting back and waiting. Do something before something happens to you. Take action. That's what we mean by activity.
Absolutely. I mean, and this is so interesting because there are a lot of couples that I've spoken to where one person will say, well, Pastor, I'm just sitting down and I'm just waiting, I'm waiting. I mean, it's been for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 11, well, 15 can't go backwards, 17 years, where the person is just saying that, I've made these observations. I'm not really happy about some of the things that are happening, but I'm just waiting for them to change, and that is being very passive. That's been very passive.
But the chances are they will not change. If you wait, listen, every now and then we come across a campaign for justice or a campaign for the protection of abused children or on the privileged society or something to that effect. Mm-hmm. And change happens when people get active and take action. That's the idea. If we sit back and do nothing, change will not take place. So if you're sitting back there and hoping that things will change just by you waiting, that is very unlikely.
Right. I think, I was just thinking of the civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King, and the fact that he took a nonviolent approach. He was assertive, but not necessarily aggressive in terms of violence, but he was able to maybe not, he didn't live to see, but he was able to create a movement that was able to create change in a particular society. And it's kind of similar as an individual in your relationship, you got to be active. You can't sit back passively. You don't have to be aggressive and dysfunctional and rude, but you can address an issue because it's a real issue. And if your spouse is ignoring your feelings, if your spouse is taking you for granted, if your spouse is not being a good manager of or steward of the family finances, these are really important matters that need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed assertively. And not just sit back and say, I've seen it and I'm waiting for it to change, because the change may end up being bankruptcy, or may end up being you having emotional issues, having a nervous breakdown because you never chose to assertively address them.
But you made a reference to Dr. Martin Luther King. And although he died in the process, he was a part of the change. Right. And today he's celebrated. We still talk about him. We still live his legacy as a result of the affirmative action that he took. Black people in America can vote. Black people in America can go to school. They ended the laws of segregation. And I can go on because he took action. When we don't take actions, things will continue the way they are. So let's zero in on marriages. You're in your relationship. You're not enjoying it. You are enduring it. So you're in a sad state. When you get to the place in your marriage where you're enduring rather than enjoying, you're in a sad state. But if you do nothing about it, if you don't take action, we're talking about the law of activity. If you don't take action, things will not improve. Things will not naturally change for the better. And that's the bottom line of what we're talking about today. So we are saying in this law, and again, I want to emphasize the law of activity states that we need to take the initiative to solve our problems rather than being passive. So let's go with this now, Doc. Some spouses in relationships go-getters. They are initiators of things. They are always doing something for the family, organizing a vacation, planning the next trip, looking at the repairs for the house, and then the other spouse sits back and just waits for things to happen. In the process, somebody's going to get disgusted.
Well, look, I mean, this is such a real scenario. I have had countless discussions with couples where individuals are saying, Pastor, this is just so difficult. And on both sides of the coin, males and females, where person said, my spouse would just sit back and they couldn't care if Friday falls on a Wednesday. They come home, there's food to eat. They wouldn't ask how the food got there. Bills are paid. They never ask how come the bills have never, the electricity has never been cut off. And I'm, some people say I'm on my nose trying to make things happen, and my spouse is just there functioning as though it's life as normal. And this is such a real scenario in the context of marriages, and creates so marriage. This law of activity is so important in terms of people to realize that they ought not to just sit back and think that things will change. For the person who is doing all of the work, Doc, that person also needs to set a boundary. That person needs to set a boundary so that they will be in a better position as time goes by, to be more balanced, and the relationship can be in a far more balanced position.
Well, Doc, there are times when you hear couples complain, and sometimes it goes like this. Listen, I feel that my partner is taking me for granted, or my partner is pushing me. My partner is always saying, we need to get this done, we need to get that done. That is perhaps because you're too passive and you are not setting boundaries. What we know is that the assertive individual, the active person, let me use that word, the active person is more able to set boundaries because they're taking initiatives, because they're active, because they want to get things done. They're more likely to be the ones to set boundaries. If you're passive and you're sitting by and you are not establishing boundaries, well, guess what? If there is not a boundary marker, then I feel I have the license to walk. or to I don't want to use the word trespass because there's no boundary marker. I just occupy. And so when a spouse refuses to set boundaries, then the other person will simply occupy the space. And if you are there feeling pressured, feeling pushed into a corner, because every time your spouse steps over, you withdraws a little bit more. What you're doing is that you're giving them a little more space. And again, we're saying you have to take action and stop being passive.
So the challenge here then is that you end up saying that you feel overwhelmed because you end up having, as it were, in some cases, to do everything. But you have not done anything to establish any type of boundary that protects you. And so the point we're making here is, being passive, not saying anything. Some people think that it's helpful to the relationship. As you were saying some time ago, Doc, I think last week, you were saying that some people think that, okay, if I don't set a boundary, or if I try to set a boundary, my spouse will not love me, will withdraw love, but what you're trying to avoid in the short term is what is going to actually affect you worse in the long term. The very thing that you're running away from is the very thing that will end up happening if you don't speak up and if you don't seek to address these boundaries. So we're saying that being passive, being quiet is not the answer to addressing these concerns. The answer really is being able to speak. And some people, just kind of transitioning, some people don't want to set boundaries, or they don't want to be assertive because they think they may be wrong. They think that, if I set this boundary, I might be doing it incorrectly. But what I've learned in life, Doc, is that if you don't make mistakes, you cannot grow. All right, you cannot grow. And so, even within the context, we're not saying that you're going to get everything perfectly right all of the time, but we are saying that don't become impotent because you don't try. We're saying try, speak up, learn to become more assertive, and you will definitely see growth in the context of your relationship.
I'm glad you made reference to the fact that sometimes you may make mistakes. Boundary setters and active people are people who are willing to take risk. I mean, right. There is hardly anything in life that happens that does not involve a measure of risk. And if your fear is that you may fail, I want to remind you today that failure is not fatal. Some of the very great inventors of all times, they tried 100 times before they got it right. And every time you try and something doesn't work, it is a reminder that, okay, this is not the way to do it. So at least you can learn something from that. But we have to be willing to take risk. I mean, you got married. If you didn't get, there's a risk that is involved in everything. But if you step back and say, I don't know if this is going to work, so I'm not going to do it, you never would have been married. Right. So go ahead and take some risk, right? Take some risk. And we're not suggesting, Dr. Braithwaite, that you must just go and do anything, but sit down, look at it, count the costs.
Calculated risk.
Yes, that's right. Yes. That's right.
Absolutely. No, I was just going to add that, active people take risks. You make the point. You try something, you experience a limit, and then you adapt. You recognize that, the thing that you put in place didn't work in the way that you really wanted it to work. And so you adapt, you adjust. And look, it's really about maturity in relationships. I have come to the conclusion, Doc, that marriage is for mature people. Right. And you can have young people who are mature. And the point here is that, as you grow in your relationship, you have to grow up. You just have to grow up. You cannot remain immature in a relationship to the point where, if a person makes a mistake, that's the end of it. I mean, mistakes are a part of the growth experience. And if you're going to grow, you got to try, you got to take risks and learn together rather than throw your hands up in the air and say, you know what, I can't do this anymore.
Most definitely. Now, Doc, I want to just share, at least to begin to share here, when one spouse is active and the other is passive, there is the environment where there is a strong likelihood that we will have some challenges, some problems. And if we can just highlight what some of these issues may be. First, the active spouse may dominate the passive one. That is very likely because one is active and the other is passive. So the active person is going to take the lead, is going to be pushing. Now, if you're married, if your spouse is active and you're passive and your spouse is taking charge, you may soon begin to think, well, this person wants to run my life. That's because you're passive.
But I really want to make a point here, and that is that sometimes the dominant spouse may not even intend to be dominant.
That's right.
The truth is, because you have remained passive, the person, you made the point earlier, the person just continues to encroach upon your territory without an active plan to do that. They just realize that, hey, look, wherever I push, the other person goes. It's like if you have a low-lying land, and when it rains, the water floods your area, and you never build up your land, or you never put up a back wall or anything to prevent the water. The water just keeps flooding, and it keeps coming, and it goes further and further and further. In order to address that, you have to do something about it, and that's what I'm saying. For a spouse who is passive, inadvertently allowing the more dominant spouse to take, so to speak, control of your life.
But the other thing is, Doc, not only is there sometimes this element of domination by the active spouse, and as you correctly said, sometimes not intentional, but on the part of the active spouse may also at times feel abandoned by the passive one. Before long, this active spouse is going to begin to think, I thought this was supposed to be a two-way relationship. I'm doing all these things. I'm taking all these initiatives. Where's my spouse? What's going on? My spouse has abandoned ship. And that can be a strain on the active spouse.
Yes, very true. Very, very, very good observation in that regard. Beautiful. Well, our time is running, so we got to move to the next area. The other one, Doc, is that the active spouse may feel abandoned. You kind of just highlighted it by the passive one, and so you really roped it in there. And so, there's not much more to be said on that. Only suffice it to say that, again, sometimes the very thing that we don't want to happen is the very thing that we allow to happen by our passivity. And so we're saying, look, passiveness doesn't necessarily answer the question. Just being quiet. I hear spouses say, look, Pastor, I don't have anything to say. And I'm saying that that's not going to be healthy for your relationship.
Well, the other one, Doc, is a natural outgrowth of the first one, that the passive spouse may become too dependent on the active spouse's initiatives, so that after a while you have become stuck in your passivity to the point where you are dependent on your spouse to do something if something is going to happen. So you may find a situation where there's a discussion, we need to take a vacation, where shall we go? And your response is going to be, you decide. Because you have come to the point where you don't seem to be able to make a decision any longer.
Right. And that's unfortunate. I think, where you can sometimes see this is where one of the spouse may have to travel for maybe an extended period of time, and the other spouse now feels like a fish out of water. They don't know how to pay the bills. They don't know how to change the gas. They don't know how to, turn on the generator if it needs to be turned on. They don't know how to handle other matters if there's an issue with house maintenance. You don't know who to call. That's because you've become so passive in the relationship. And it might not just be on matters of house maintenance, but so many other matters, even managing your children. So, you can become so dependent that you lose your own independence.
Well, I'm thinking that some of these matters of house maintenance, etc., it's kind of natural for one person to understand more than the other, etc. But if we up it a little more, Doc, with child discipline, for example, imagine that your spouse went away and the child did something wrong, and you have to pick up the phone and call your spouse and say, so-and-so did such and such a thing wrong. What am I supposed to do about it? I mean, that's a travesty.
Right, definitely. So you need to be involved. That's the point I'm making. Whether it's house maintenance or child discipline or some other something of legal matters within the household, you need to be involved in every aspect of running the house. That's the bottom line.
Otherwise, you may come home and find that the house is sold and you don't know anything about it.
You never knew.
Well, the other one, as our time winds down, is that the passive spouse may resent the power of the active one. This active person has now become very powerful. Sometimes we use the term, this is the person that wears the pants in the house. They're the ones with the power. They make the decisions. And that happens a lot because and this doesn't have to be a man. It could very well be a woman.
Very well be, yeah. So in relationship to the discussion on envy a week ago, the whole issue of you learning from your spouse can be helpful here. If the person has that assertiveness, that power, so to speak, you may benefit from it. If you know how to manage it, to use it for your advantage as well in the context of the relationship. So important, yeah.
I think, Doc, in the couple of remaining minutes that we have here, the sad thing is this final point that the passive spouse may be too intimidated by the active one to say no. After a while, you become so dependent, you become so passive, so weak, for want of a better word, that when you realize that you lack the power, that you lack the ability, that you do not have the assertiveness that you should have, that you can't take action, you get to the point where you feel intimidated to say no, so that whatever your spouse says, you go along because you just lack the strength, the backbone to be able to express a different opinion.
Right. And that's unfortunate. And that's not where relationships ought to be. You are your partner's equal. You're supposed to be able to share. You are supposed to be able to give views. You're supposed to be able to have feelings and emotions about things. And in the relationship, it should be harmonious. And as we mentioned earlier, sometimes the relationship gets out of balance, not intentionally, but sometimes because one spouse withdraws or feels that they do not have what it takes to address matters, or maybe just afraid of making mistakes or taking risks. And what we're saying here is that in the context of your marriage, in this law of activity, you have to be actively involved in your relationship. You cannot stand on the sidelines and expect the relationship to be successful.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. We have to end it now. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. We will be back next week with another episode of Marriage Encounter. May God bless you. Until next week.